Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight, we pour a glass of mystery unlike any other. In the soft flicker of candlelight, a glass of wine rests untouched, yet within it hides a shadow, a secret that could shatter reputations and expose betrayal. Was it a simple drink or a silent witness to murder? Join us as Hercule Poirot unravels the enigma, where every sip whispers of deceit and every reflection hides the truth. Stay with us till the very end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that linger long after the story ends. Chapter 1: The Toast at Midnight. The dining room of Chateau du Clermont glowed with golden light, its crystal chandeliers casting fragile rainbows upon the walls. Outside, the Loire Valley slept beneath a silver moon, but within these ancient stone walls, laughter and music stirred the heavy air. The guests, dressed in velvet and silk, their jewels flashing in the candlelight, formed a portrait of cultivated ease, as though nothing in the world could intrude upon their revelry. At the head of the long oak table, Madame Renée Delacroix, widow of the late vineyard master, raised her glass with the serene authority of a queen. She was not young. Her hair shone silver in the lamplight, but her posture was as regal as the chateau itself, and her dark eyes, sharp as daggers, missed nothing. To her right, seated with a curious mixture of humility and confidence, was Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, immaculately dressed in his tailored evening suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, and his mustaches waxed to perfection, looked slightly out of place among the revelers. He had not come for wine or merriment. He had come because he had been invited, summoned, almost, by Madame herself. To Poirot's left sat Inspector Georges Moreau of the Charite, a man whose broad shoulders and blunt manner could not disguise his sharp intelligence. The inspector had been called down from Paris to advise on a matter not yet spoken of openly, and his presence was cloaked in the polite fiction of family acquaintance. Madame lifted her glass higher, and the table fell into silence. To friends, old and new, she declared, her voice resonant, commanding. To the vines that sustain us, to the wine that binds us, and she allowed herself a smile, brief but full of meaning, to the secrets that make life worth living. The glasses were raised, the ruby-red wine catching the light like pools of garnet. Poirot noted the delicate shimmer in each goblet, the swirl of liquid as guests tilted the stemware to their lips. He alone, with subtle precision, did not drink, but merely let the wine touch his lips before setting the glass down. For a moment, silence hung. Then the orchestra in the adjoining salon resumed its soft waltz, and conversation swelled once more. Yet in that silence, in the candlelit shimmer of 100 reflections, something unseen shifted. The faintest shadow seemed to dance across one of the glasses, there, just for a second, as the flame flickered and a guest's hand trembled. A shadow in the glass of wine. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He saw, though he said nothing. The dinner progressed with elegance and tension. The guests were of varied character. Etienne Delacroix, the widow's only son, handsome but weary-eyed, as though carrying the vineyard's burdens upon his shoulders. Beside him sat his wife, Celeste, whose beauty was marred only by the brittleness of her smile. Opposite, Dr. Lucien Marchand, the village physician, spoke in low tones with the Baron de Bigny, whose wealth had long been entwined with the Delacroix fortune. At the far end of the table, a cluster of younger guests whispered and laughed, their merriment a thin veil over something more brittle. Envy, perhaps, or fear. Among them was a woman whose face Poirot recognized from Parisian society columns. Mademoiselle Sabine Roux, a singer of no small fame, her lips stained crimson as the wine she drank too eagerly. Poirot observed them all with the meticulous patience of a chess master. He saw every glance, every hesitation, every tremor in the hand that lifted a fork. He saw Madame's gaze flick to her son with a trace of worry. He saw Celeste's smile tighten when Sabine laughed too loudly at Etienne's jest. He saw the doctor's hand linger too long on the stem of his glass, as though steadying something within himself. Yes, there were secrets here. Poirot felt them in the very air. The clock struck midnight. A hush fell again, as though all the guests felt the hour's weight. Madame rose from her chair, lifted her glass once more, and proclaimed, "To the vineyard of Claremont, to its future, and to the truth which cannot be hidden forever." Her words rang strange, almost ominous, and even Moreau shifted uneasily in his chair. The guests exchanged quick, questioning glances. But before any could ask what she meant, Madame drained her glass in a single swallow. And then she staggered. The crystal goblet slipped from her fingers and shattered upon the marble floor. A dark stain spread across the tablecloth where drops of wine had spilled, but more terrible still was the sight of Madame herself. Her face drained of color, her lips parted in a soundless gasp, her hands clawing at her throat. Cries erupted around the table. Etienne leapt to his feet. Celeste shrieked. Sabine's laughter turned to a piercing scream. Dr. Marchand rushed forward, but Poirot was quicker. He had already risen, his eyes blazing with terrible clarity. "Do not move her," Poirot commanded. His voice cut through the panic like a blade. "Stand back, all of you. Stand back." But it was too late. Madame Renée Delacroix, matriarch of Claremont, collapsed into the arms of her son. Her body trembled once, then grew still. Inspector Moreau knelt swiftly beside her, fingers at her neck, then looked up with grim finality. "She is dead." The room plunged into silence. Only the faint strains of the waltz, drifting from the salon, continued, a grotesque accompaniment to tragedy. Poirot stood perfectly still. His gray-green eyes, sharp as emeralds, surveyed the table, the glasses, the broken crystal on the floor. He bent, plucked up one fragment of the shattered goblet, and examined it under the light. Then, with the utmost care, he picked up Madame's wineglass from where it had fallen, its ruby contents still staining the rim. He raised it, turned it slowly, and it was there again, the faintest darkness swirling within the depths, a shadow in the glass of wine. Poirot's mustache twitched. He spoke softly, but the entire table heard. "Mesdames et messieurs, this was no accident. Madame Delacroix has been murdered." A storm of voices erupted. "Murdered?" cried Etienne, his face pale. "No, it cannot be." Celeste clutched at his arm, whispering, "Poison, it must be poison." Sabine Rue, trembling now, whispered hoarsely. She said secrets. She knew something. The Baron d'Aubigny slammed his hand upon the table. "This is outrageous. In my presence, poison in the wine." But Poirot lifted a hand, and silence fell again. "The glass of Madame, it has betrayed its owner. It holds a shadow, a whisper of the truth. Poison, yes, but more than that, a message." Inspector Moreau rose to his feet, his voice firm. "No one is to leave this chateau. Do you hear me? No one." The great doors of the dining hall closed with a heavy boom. The guests shifted uneasily, their silks rustling like dry leaves in a storm. Outside, the moon disappeared behind a cloud, plunging the chateau into darkness save for the trembling candle flames. Poirot stood at the head of the table where Madame had fallen. His small figure, so precise, so still, seemed suddenly immense, casting a shadow across them all. He spoke slowly, with grave authority. "We are gathered in this house of wine and wealth, but we are also gathered in a house of secrets. Madame Delacroix has taken hers to the grave, but others remain. And Hercule Poirot, he will uncover them. His voice softened, and yet it carried through the room with terrible weight. Remember this, M.S. Amos. A shadow in a glass of wine is not an illusion. It is the truth waiting to be revealed. The guests were escorted to their chambers under watchful eyes. Whispers filled the corridors of the chateau, whispers of betrayal, of inheritances disputed, of debts unpaid, of lovers betrayed. Poirot remained in the dining hall long after the others had gone. He examined each glass, each plate, each candlestick. He saw patterns where others saw only clutter. He thought of Madame's words, of the secrets she claimed could not remain hidden. At last, he walked to the window and gazed out upon the vineyards stretching pale and endless beneath the moon. He remembered other times, other shadows. The crimson river of death on the Nile. The chill night aboard the train in Murder on the Orient Express. The tragic secrets unearthed in the mystery of the Blue Train. Always, beneath the veneer of elegance, there was deceit. And always, the truth demanded to be known. Poirot's reflection stared back at him in the glass, his eyes meeting his own. He whispered to himself, in that private tone reserved only for the gravity of murder. The game begins. Chapter 2, Whispers Across the Table. The chateau did not sleep that night. Though the guests had retreated to their appointed chambers, the corridors pulsed with whispers, the air thick with fear and suspicion. Servants tiptoed, their faces pale. The old walls, accustomed to centuries of secrets, seemed to strain under the weight of this new one. A candle guttered in a draught, casting jagged shadows along the stone. Poirot remained in the dining hall until the last servant had withdrawn. Inspector Moreau paced at his side, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. Mon Dieu, Moreau muttered, though Poirot noticed the inspector's French tongue thickened in anger. To poison a woman like Madame Delacroix, in her own home, at her own table, it is an outrage without equal. You saw it, Poirot. You saw her collapse before your eyes. Poirot bent over the table once more, his gaze lingering on the red stain that spread like a wound across the white linen. Oui, my friend. I saw, and more than that, I observed. Always there is a difference. Moreau frowned. You mean you saw something I did not? Poirot straightened, tugging his waistcoat into place. I mean that each gesture, each word, each look exchange across this table is a whisper of truth. The whispers, they accumulate, Inspector. They tell a story, and we must learn to listen. They began with the glasses. Poirot arranged them in a neat row along the sideboard, his gloved fingers careful not to smudge the rims. The crystal gleamed in the dim candlelight, each one stained faintly with red, each one carrying a trace of lips, a shadow of fingerprints, a memory of laughter now silenced. This was hers, Poirot murmured, lifting Madame Delacroix's glass. The dregs within shimmered, dark as blood. Poison here, certainly. But how? When? And, most important, by whose hand? Moreau grunted. The servants will be interrogated at dawn. The kitchen, the wine cellar, the footmen who poured the glasses, someone knows. Perhaps, Poirot replied gently. But poison, Inspector, is not always slipped by a servant's hand. It is the weapon of the calculating mind, the mind that wishes to strike without being seen. The shadow in the glass is cast by one of our fellow guests, I think. He looked once more at the assembled glasses. Each guest had drunk, and each guest had lived. Only Madame's had been tainted. That was deliberate. That was murder. The doors creaked open, and Etienne Delacroix entered. He looked older than his years, grief carving fresh lines into his handsome face. His eyes, red-rimmed, darted from Poirot to the empty chair at the head of the table, then back again. Messieurs, he said hoarsely, I cannot sleep. My mother is gone, and here you are, examining glasses as though they could speak. Do you think they will tell you who killed her? Poirot's gaze softened. Perhaps, monsieur. The glasses, they do not lie. Unlike men and women. Etienne flinched at that, and Poirot marked it. You must understand, Etienne continued, his voice rising with sudden desperation. My mother, she was not without enemies. The vineyard, the fortune, the inheritance. It has attracted many who smile with their lips but curse with their hearts. Even among those she welcomed to her table. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, I saw as much. And you, monsieur, were you surprised by her words? When she spoke of secrets that could not remain hidden, Etienne's eyes darted away. She spoke in riddles always, even to me, perhaps especially to me. Moreau stepped forward, his tone sharp. And what did she mean by it? What secrets? Etienne's hand trembled as he ran it through his dark hair. I do not know. I swear it. She carried burdens she would not share. But I tell you this, whoever poisoned her, they will not escape justice. I will see to it, with or without your help. He turned abruptly and strode out, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silent hall. Poirot and Moreau exchanged a glance. Suspicious, Moreau muttered. Grief speaks in many tones. Poirot replied, though his eyes were still on the door where Etienne had vanished. But yes, suspicious. The next morning, the household assembled in the drawing room, summoned by Inspector Moreau. The great fire crackled, but it did little to warm the atmosphere. The guests sat stiffly, their eyes darting, their voices hushed. Poirot stood at the mantel, hands clasped neatly before him, surveying the assembly like a judge before his jury. Celeste Delacroix sat beside her husband, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed. Sabine Rue lounged in an armchair, though her eyes betrayed her restless fear. The Baron de Bigny polished his watch chain with unnecessary vigor, while Dr. Lucien Marchand stood apart, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a tableau of unease, and Poirot relished the silence before he broke it. Mesdames, messieurs, he began softly, we are here because last night a great crime was committed. Madame Delacroix was poisoned, murdered, in the very heart of her home, in the presence of her family and her friends. One among you carries the knowledge, and perhaps the guilt, and Hercule Poirot will discover who. Murmurs rippled across the room, but Poirot raised a hand. I will not accuse without proof. But already, the whispers, they are speaking. They spoke at the table last night. They speak still, and I am listening. The questioning began. Celeste was first. Her voice, low and tremulous, filled the room. I saw nothing unusual. The glasses were poured as always. Renée lifted hers first, as always. She was proud, commanding. But then she fell. It happened so quickly. Poirot's eyes never left her face. And when she spoke of secrets, you were not surprised. Celeste hesitated just a fraction. My mother-in-law enjoyed her little dramas. It was her way of keeping control, keeping everyone off balance. And you, madam? Did she keep you off balance as well? Celeste's lips pressed together. She did not approve of me. She never did. A whisper across the table, unspoken but heavy. Disapproval, tension, resentment. Poirot stored away. Next came Sabine Rue. She laughed at first, though it was hollow. Secrets, monsieur? All of Paris knew Madame Delacroix loved her vineyard more than anything. More than her son, more than her family, more than life itself. Perhaps her secret was simply that her heart was made of stone. Poirot's mustache bristled. And yet you came here to drink her wine, to sit at her table. Sabine's eyes flashed. I was invited. Etienne enjoys my company, if you must know. And perhaps Madame Delacroix enjoyed watching me unsettle her daughter-in-law. A whisper across the table. Jealousy, rivalry, temptation. Poirot tucked it into his growing collection. The Baron d'Aubigny was indignant. "This is nonsense. I've been an ally of the Delacroix family for decades. I drank the same wine as the rest of you. If it was poisoned, why am I not dead as well?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Because the poison was meant for one glass only. For hers." The Baron huffed. "Then blame the servants. They poured it." Moreau stepped forward. "The servants are being questioned even now. None had opportunity without being seen." The Baron shifted uncomfortably. A whisper across the table. Avoidance, perhaps guilt, or merely fear. Dr. Marchand spoke last, his voice quiet, measured. "I am a physician. I saw at once the signs of poisoning, constriction of the throat, pallor of the skin, convulsions. It was swift, merciless. Whoever administered it chose their poison well." Poirot tilted his head. "You speak as one familiar with such matters, Doctor." Marchand inclined his head. "It is my duty to know the agents of death. In medicine, as in crime, knowledge is the difference between life and death." A whisper across the table. Knowledge, expertise, access. The doctor was not above suspicion. When the questioning ended, Poirot paced slowly before the fire, his hands folded behind his back. The silence was tense, expectant. At the table of Madame Delacroix, there were many whispers, he said softly. The whisper of disapproval, the whisper of jealousy, the whisper of avoidance, the whisper of knowledge, each one a thread, delicate, almost invisible. And yet, Mies Amos, when one weaves together enough whispers, one creates a voice. And that voice speaks of murder. The guests shifted, unease heavy in the air. Poirot turned suddenly, his eyes sharp as glass. "One among you feared the secrets Madame might reveal. One among you poisoned her to silence her forever. The shadow in her glass was no accident. It was intention." The fire crackled, and in its light, faces tightened, throats swallowed, eyes flickered away. Each guest heard the accusation, and each wondered if it pointed to them. Poirot allowed the silence to linger. Then, softly, he added, "But Hercule Poirot, he will uncover the truth. And when he does, there will be no more whispers. Only confession." That night, as the chateau settled into uneasy slumber, Poirot sat in his chamber, gazing into the darkness. He thought of Madame's words, "To the truth which cannot be hidden forever." He remembered other truths, hidden behind elegance and wealth, revealed only when death laid them bare. The tragedy of sad Cyprus, the cruel games of peril at End House, the deceptive glitter of Lord Edgware Dies. Always the truth had emerged. Always, despite the shadows, light prevailed. Poirot closed his eyes, his little gray cells alive with possibility. Somewhere among the whispers across the table lay the key, and he would find it. Chapter 3. The Stain Upon Heart. Morning light broke over the vineyards of Claremont, a pale gold spilling across the rows of vines. Yet within the chateau, the air remained heavy, as though the night's darkness had left its residue upon every wall, every curtain, every whispered breath. Poirot rose early, his routine as precise as always. His mustaches were combed and waxed to perfection, his shoes polished, his tie exactly centered. For in Poirot's mind, order was not a matter of vanity. It was a weapon against chaos. And murder was chaos distilled. When he descended to the breakfast room, he found it nearly deserted. Only Celeste Delacroix sat by the window, untouched tea cooling in the porcelain cup before her. Her eyes were fixed upon the vineyards beyond, but the tightness of her jaw betrayed her thoughts. Poirot approached with delicate courtesy. "Madam." She turned, startled, then forced a smile that never touched her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, I fear I cannot eat. Not after last night." Poirot inclined his head. "It is natural. Grief, it does not make the appetite." And yet, he lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer. "There are other hungers, n'est-ce pas? Hungers of the heart. Her face froze. For an instant, something raw, pained, flickered in her gaze. Then she looked away. You speak in riddles, monsieur. Poirot folded his hands neatly. Last night, at the table, there were whispers, not of voices, but of hearts. I heard them, and among them was the whisper of resentment, of a woman who felt disapproved, of unwanted, unloved. Celeste's lips parted, then closed again. She pressed her fingers against her cup, though she did not lift it. Finally, she whispered, she despised me. From the moment Etienne brought me here, I was judged. Every word I spoke, every gesture I made, it was weighed and found wanting. Do you know what it is, monsieur, to live under the shadow of another woman's disdain? Poirot's eyes softened. I know that disapproval can cut more deeply than the sharpest blade. And yet, Madame Delacroix is gone. The shadow she cast, it lingers, but perhaps in her death, you are free. Celeste shuddered. Free or damned? Everyone will say, I had reason, that I wanted her gone. But I did not. I swear it. Poirot touched her hand lightly, just enough to steady her trembling fingers. Madam, do not swear. The truth, it has no need of oaths. It will speak for itself. Later that morning, Inspector Moreau summoned the household once again, this time to the library. Sunlight streamed across the shelves of leather-bound volumes, but the grandeur did little to soften the tension in the air. Etienne stood near the fireplace, his face drawn, his fists clenched at his sides. The Baron de Bigny lingered by the decanter, though he poured nothing. Sabine Rue sprawled upon the sofa, feigning nonchalance, while Dr. Marchand leaned against the table, silent, watchful. Moreau addressed them bluntly. The poison used last night was strychnine. The doctor has confirmed it. A murmur ran through the group. Poirot added quietly, It is a cruel poison. It acts swiftly, violently. Not a choice made in haste, but one made with calculation. Sabine gave a nervous laugh. And who among us carries strychnine in their pocket, monsieur? Surely not I. Marchand's eyes flicked toward her. Strychnine is not easily obtained, mademoiselle, but it is not impossible. It is used in medicine, in very small doses, as a stimulant. Any physician would know its properties. Poirot noted the emphasis, the slight defensiveness. A stain upon the heart, perhaps, knowledge turned against itself. Poirot moved among them like a conductor before an orchestra, each question a note, each reply a chord. To you, Baron, he said, turning suddenly. You and Madame Delacroix, you shared many ventures, did you not? The Baron's chest swelled. For decades, yes. Our family's fortunes are entwined. And yet, Poirot continued smoothly. Financial entanglements, they can also become chains. Were there difficulties, perhaps? The Baron's jaw tightened. Business is never without its strains. But Renée was as shrewd as they come. She knew where every franc was placed, every debt accounted for. If there was strain, it was hers, not mine. Poirot inclined his head. A whisper of money, a stain of debt, perhaps. Another thread for his collection. It was Etienne who broke the fragile composure of the group. His voice, low but charged with emotion, filled the library. You all think it, do you not? That I wished her dead. That my own mother was an obstacle I could not bear. Yes, she was harsh. Yes, she clung to the vineyard as though it were her soul. But she was my mother, my blood. Do you believe I would poison her with my own hand? His eyes shone, furious and wounded. Poirot's voice was gentle. Monsieur, it is not the task of Hercule Poirot to believe, but to know. And what I know is this. Love, it can stain the heart as deeply as hatred. One kills from greed, another from fear, another from love twisted into desperation. The motive, it is always written upon the heart. Etienne trembled, then turned away, pressing his fists against his eyes. Celeste reached for him, but he pulled back. The room fell into heavy silence. That afternoon, Poirot walked alone through the vineyard. The vines stretched row upon row, their leaves glistening with dew, their roots deep in the rich soil. Here was the heart of Claremont, the true mistress of this estate, more constant than any human life. He thought of Madame's last toast, her words about truth and secrets. Had she intended to reveal something that very night? Something so dangerous it had cost her life? Poirot paused at the crest of a hill, looking down upon the chateau with its gray stone towers. He remembered other estates, other secrets, the hidden passions at the Hollow, the cruel inheritance games of after the funeral, the long-buried guilt of 5 little pigs. Always beneath the surface of wealth and respectability, the human heart beat with stains invisible until death forced them into the light. Poirot bent, plucked a single grape from the vine, and held it up to the sun. Such sweetness, he murmured, and yet, within, there may be bitterness. As with people, he placed the grape upon his tongue, savoring it with solemn care. Yes, the vineyard, it too holds its secrets. That evening, Poirot returned to the dining hall, now silent and deserted. The table had been cleared, the linen replaced, yet in Poirot's mind the stain of spilled wine remained, dark and accusing. He stood at the head of the table, where Madame had once presided, and closed his eyes. He imagined the scene again, the raised glasses, the flickering candlelight, the whispered glances. He saw Madame's hand lift the goblet, saw the tremor in the flame, saw the shadow in the glass. Who placed it there? He whispered to himself. Who stained the heart of the wine with death? A rustle broke his concentration. He turned. Sabine Roos stood in the doorway, her silk robe wrapped loosely about her, her hair unpinned, tumbling over her shoulders. Her expression was unreadable. "You haunt this room, monsieur," she said softly, "like a ghost." Poirot bowed his head. "Perhaps I seek to speak with ghosts." She entered slowly, her eyes drifting to the head of the table. She despised me, too, you know. She thought me frivolous, unworthy. She wanted me gone. Poirot studied her. "And what did you want, mademoiselle?" Sabine's lips curved, though not in joy. "I wanted to live, to love, to be seen. Etienne, he saw me, at least for a time. But she would never have allowed it." A pause. A whisper across the table once more. A stain upon the heart. Poirot said nothing. Sabine gave a low laugh, brittle as glass. "Do not look at me so, monsieur. I may be foolish, but I am not a murderess." She turned and slipped away, her perfume lingering in the air long after she had gone. Poirot stood very still. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, followed the shadow she left behind. That night, in his chamber, Poirot arranged his thoughts as carefully as he arranged his clothes. The whispers of resentment, jealousy, greed, love, they were threads woven together. But now another joined them, despair. He whispered aloud, as though to the spirit of Madame herself. "There is a stain upon the heart of this house. Your death, it was not only about the vineyard, or the fortune, or the secrets. None. It was about the heart, twisted, poisoned, bleeding into the glass. But which heart? That, madam, is what we shall see." He closed his eyes, the shadows deep around him, and let the little gray cells work in silence. Chapter 4. The Gathering of Shadows. The next morning broke with a restless unease. The golden light that filtered through the tall windows of the chateau was deceptive. It was a gentle dawn, yet it felt like a mask hiding darker currents beneath. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his guest chamber, his mustaches immaculately groomed, his suit crisp as though he had slept in perfect order. On the small table beside him, a decanter of wine gleamed in the morning sun. He had not touched it. Instead, his gaze lingered upon the vineyard that stretched beyond the house, its rows of vines twisting in autumnal silence. Somewhere among those rows, Poirot thought, lay the truth. When he descended the wide staircase, he found Inspector Giroux waiting in the hall. The French inspector looked as though he had not slept at all. His eyes were bloodshot, his temper raw. "Another interview?" Poirot asked lightly, his voice carrying that mixture of curiosity and command. "Yes," Giroux replied curtly. "And this time I intend to break them. One of these people is lying." Poirot gave a gentle smile. "Mon cher, they all lie. The question is not whether they lie, but why. That is the key." The dining hall had been stripped of its warmth. No laughter rang, no cheerful chatter. The guests were gathered reluctantly, like actors forced to rehearse a play they had begun to despise. Madeleine, the hostess, was pale, her usual glamour drained. Paul de la Roche sat rigid in his chair, as though carved from stone. Charles Beaumont shifted endlessly, unable to rest his hands upon the table without drumming impatient rhythms. Annette, the maid, stood along the wall, her eyes lowered but her ears sharp. Poirot let his gaze sweep over them. He thought of Christie's Sad Cypress, a tale where appearances deceived and love became tangled with death. Here, too, affections and ambitions were hidden behind courteous masks. "Madame, Messieurs," Poirot began, "we are gathered again, not to dine, but to discover. One among you holds the knowledge of how a glass of wine became the chalice of death." A murmur ran through the room. Poirot's words, soft though they were, struck with the force of judgment. He placed a small object upon the table, the wine glass from the night of the banquet. Its delicate rim glinted under the light, but its shadow fell long and deep across the white cloth. "The shadow in the glass of wine," Poirot said quietly. "It is not only a figure of speech, but the very image of guilt." The questioning began anew. Poirot, unlike Giroux, did not storm or shout. He asked gently, coaxing truth from silence. He turned first to Paul de la Roche. "Monsieur, your relationship with the victim, Henri Latour, was not only professional. You quarreled. Witnesses attest to this." Paul's jaw tightened. "He was reckless. His experiments endangered the reputation of my vineyards. But murder? Nah, monsieur, that I did not commit." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yet your resentment was bitter. Resentment can, sometimes, poison more surely than arsenic." Paul said nothing, but his hand trembled slightly upon the table. Next, Poirot faced Charles Beaumont. The financier smiled too readily, too brightly, like a man hiding the rod of fear. "You invested heavily, did you not, in Henri Latour's wine enterprise?" Poirot asked. "Yes," Charles admitted. "A bold gamble, but he promised results. Instead, he produced only eccentric experiments and wasted barrels." "You lost money," Poirot observed. "A fortune," Charles said bitterly. Poirot leaned closer. "And money lost, monsieur, can be motive found. Recall Lord Edgware Dies, where gain and ambition drove crime beneath the surface of society." Charles paled, and for once he had no witty retort. Then Poirot's gaze fell upon Madeleine. She was trembling, though her poise never fully broke. "Madame, you spoke last night of Henri as a dear friend." "Yes," she whispered, "yet the heart hides many truths. Were you truly his friend, or something more?" Her eyes flashed, then filled with tears. "He admired me. He wrote me letters. But I swear to you, I never encouraged him." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "It is not encouragement we seek, madame, but honesty." Madeleine's tears slid silently down her face. And then the maidinette. Poirot's attention sharpened. "You poured the wine, did you not, ma fille?" Her voice wavered. "Yes, monsieur. It was your hand that held the glass, your hand that carried it to the victim." Annette's head bowed. I only did as I was told." The room stilled. Poirot did not press her. Not yet. Instead, he allowed silence to grow, silence in which guilt breathed louder than confession. Later that evening, Poirot retired to the library, where the air was heavy with books and dust. He lit the fire and considered all he had heard. Each had motive. Each had lied. Each shadow lengthened across the glass. And yet, there was something more subtle, something overlooked. Poirot thought of Christie's 5 Little Pigs, in which memory twisted truth and old events resurfaced in new light. Perhaps here, too, the past was not finished with the present. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. The truth, he felt, was not in the wine, not in the glass, but in the shadow it cast, figurative and real. The fire crackled. Poirot paused, and for the first time he smiled. "Yes," he murmured, "it is becoming clear. The gathering of shadows is almost complete, and soon there will be only light." Chapter 5. The Final Pour. The dining hall was transformed into a courtroom. It was Poirot's stage, his theater of truth, and every soul in the chateau had been summoned once again to sit beneath the weight of his gaze. The long table stood empty of food and wine. Only the single glass, the fatal glass, remained, gleaming like a relic of sin. The storm outside had gathered with fury. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder growled across the vineyard, and lightning lit the faces of the accused like masks in some darkened play. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small figure outlined by the firelight, his mustaches immaculate, his hands folded neatly before him. His voice, when it came, was calm, too calm, almost dreadful in its composure. "Mesdames et messieurs, the time for shadows is ended. Tonight, we shall pour the final truth." He began, as always, with order and logic. Henri Latour was not killed by accident. The poison was placed deliberately into his wineglass. But this was no crime of passion, no sudden strike. None. It was carefully prepared, executed with calculation. Let us examine. He turned to Paul de la Roche. "You hated Latour for his recklessness. Yet, monsieur, you are too proud of your vineyard to stain it with such a crime. Your passion is the vine itself, not revenge." Paul exhaled as though a burden had been lifted. Poirot's gaze moved to Charles Beaumont. "You lost much money, but money, mon ami, is the blood of your trade. You would scheme, perhaps, but kill? No, you are too much a coward for murder." Charles flushed with indignation, but did not speak. Then Poirot turned to Madeleine. Her eyes glittered with tears and fear. "You, madame, were admired by Latour. You kept his letters. Perhaps you feared a scandal. Perhaps your husband might discover. Yet no, you had nothing to gain by his death. Only sorrow, only shame." She lowered her head, trembling. And now, Poirot's eyes found the maid. Annette. She stood at the edge of the room, her apron damp with nervous sweat, her lips trembling as though already whispering confession. "Annette," Poirot said softly, "you poured the wine. You carried the glass. You said you did only as you were told. That, MES Amos, is the truth." She did as she was told. The room grew still. "By whom?" Poirot asked, his voice sharp as a blade. He moved suddenly, his finger pointing across the table. "To you, Monsieur Charles Beaumont." Charles leapt to his feet, his face pale, his hand shaking. "Lies!" he cried. "Baseless lies!" Poirot's voice rose, cutting through the storm outside. "No lies, monsieur. The poison was hidden in a decanter, but not any decanter. The one you yourself insisted Annette serve from. You instructed her, with that easy charm of yours. She obeyed, never knowing she carried death." Charles staggered back. "You were ruined by Latour's failures," Poirot continued. "Your fortune bled away. You could not endure the shame. And so you plotted, as in Murder in the Mews, where greed and desperation twisted into crime. You sought not only revenge, but release. With Latour dead, You thought to reclaim dignity and silence your loss. Lightning crashed, and in its brilliance Charles's mask shattered. He collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. "It is true," he whispered. "It is true." The room exhaled as though the air itself had been held captive. Madeleine sobbed quietly. Paul stared in cold disgust. Annette trembled, relief and horror mingling in her pale face. Poirot straightened, smoothing his jacket. The shadow in the glass of wine has been lifted. The truth, though bitter, is always the stronger vintage. Later, as the gendarmes led Charles away into the storm, Poirot lingered in the library with Inspector Giroux. "You see, mon cher," Poirot said gently, "it is not by force that truth is found, but by patience. Each lie is like a shadow. One must wait until the light strikes at the right angle, and then, voila, the shape reveals itself." Giroux, humbled, gave no reply. Poirot poured himself a single glass of untouched wine from the chateau's cellar. He held it to the firelight, watching its ruby depths, the shadow dancing across the glass. "To truth," he whispered, "always to truth." He did not drink. And so ends The Shadow in the Glass of Wine, a Hercule Poirot mystery. If you enjoyed unraveling this tale of deception and discovery, don't forget, there are many more mysteries waiting in the shadows. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another case. Your support helps bring these elegant puzzles of Poirot to life, and every click keeps the mystery alive. Now tell me, in the comments, did you suspect Charles Beaumont all along? Or did the shadow deceive you too? Until next time, keep your eyes sharp, your wits sharper, and remember, in the world of Hercule Poirot, nothing is ever quite as it seems.